you get the couch. All right. Governor Romney, thank you very much for joining us. I'm hoping we can do a little politics and then a little policy over the course of the time that we have with you. And I'd love to just start out with the state of the race on the Republican side, if you don't mind. Easy topic. Right. You know, Ronald Reagan had his 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican.
That's sort of gone by the board. Yeah.
And I wonder what I'm asking you now in your capacity, if I may, as party elder, what do you make of the tone of this campaign and the amount of name-calling, much of it emanating originally from Donald Trump?
Well, I think Mr. Trump's entry into the race and his, if you will, he said, I think yesterday, he said that some of the things he said about other candidates have been childish. I think that's probably a fair characterization coming from him. And I think for a long time, the other candidates said, I'm just going to ignore it and not respond. And I think they found that did not help them. And so they're coming back strong and standing up for themselves. Carly Fiorina did that extraordinarily well in the last debate. I think that's helped them. So I think it's unfortunate to have had the kind of personal attacks that we've seen in the process. But I think the 11th commandment was quickly lost in this race, and that I think makes it harder for us in the general.
One of the really unusual things we're seeing right now is that really the three top candidates on the Republican side, among them have zero government experience whatsoever. And you talked in the past a great deal about how valuable it would be to have a governor as President of the United States, that the next president should be governor. We've seen 2 governors drop out so far. Is that concerning to you?
Well, it's been a while, we've had some people that didn't have extensive government experience or political experience, Washington experience as presidents before. Dwight Eisenhower comes to mind. But, and as a guy who came from the business world myself, I can't denigrate business experience as preparation for government service. But surely, having had some experience dealing with the legislature and the executive branch and so forth would be of value. But I wouldn't disqualify someone just because they hadn't served in Washington or hadn't served in a state house. We do have, however, we have, I think, sort of 2 brackets, some people say, in our party, and the insurgent bracket and the mainstream conservative bracket. And I recognize that right now there's a lot of attention given to the insurgent bracket, but I think you're going to see 1 or 2 people emerge on the other side, and they'll get the visibility, and ultimately it'll come down to a race between 1 from each.
So just to be clear, are you in this scenario, are you comparing Donald Trump to Dwight Eisenhower?
The parallel does not immediately jump to mind. But that said, I think you don't have to necessarily have Washington or government experience to serve as a president.
One of the areas where Donald Trump has been getting a lot of traction is with his criticisms and his assertions about the corrupting nature of money in politics. And I'd like to hear your take on that. I mean, how serious a problem do you think it is? Do you see candidates saying things or not saying things as a consequence of big donations or the actions of super PACs and other players in the process now?
You know, I think we've really got a mess in the financial system with regards to campaigns right now. Prior to President Obama, people were living by the federal spending limits and accepting federal matching dollars, and the system was pretty well balanced between the 2 parties. The president brushed aside the federal spending limits, and now we have Katie bar the doors kind of funding. I think John McCain raised $300 or $400 million in his campaign under the federal spending limits. We had to raise $1 billion in mine. And my guess is the numbers are going to be a good deal larger this time around. I think that's a problem. I also think it's a problem to have campaigns very strictly limited as to what money they can receive, and then a super PAC that works, if you will, on behalf of a campaign, taking unlimited amounts of money. I mean, this is a real mess. And so you have the super PAC, which can't coordinate with the candidate, that's going to go out and run ads, potentially that a candidate would never run him or herself. And yet the candidate's going to get blamed for those ads. It's just a mess. And so I think you have to go back and say, okay, wait, we've got to rethink how we're going to do this. But the super PAC phenomena and unlimited contributions to super PACs have changed the dynamic in such a way that we have to rethink campaign finance.
Do you think there's active leadership within the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that would be interested in reaching Some sort of a new...
I don't think they recognize that yet. The super PAC, the impact of super PACs, I think, is going to be felt this year far more than in 2012. And I think after 2016, there may well be some interest in the part of both parties to say, okay, how do we adjust this?
Just to ask the open-ended question, not starting with money, you've experienced our politics from the inside, and it's sort of a trope that you hear all the time, our politics is broken somehow. There's something that has gone fundamentally wrong with the way we run our campaigns and choose our leaders. Is there anything else you would point to? Do you agree with that diagnosis, first of all?
Well, it's always been an ugly process. I mean, you go back to the very early days of the country and the kind of attacks and counterattacks and the half-truths and untruths that were leveled back and forth have been part of the process. I thought it was interesting, was it yesterday or the day before, that former President Bill Clinton said that his wife's email troubles were really only the fault of the media and the opposition party. And I thought, well, who else would they be the fault of? I mean, this is how it works, all right? The opposition party is going to draw those things out, and then the media reports on it. And so I don't know that this is...
Truth be told, the media didn't put the server in her house in the first place.
Yes, so there was action on her part. He's blaming the fact that attention has been drawn to this mistake on her part, on the opposition party and the media. So I don't know that I have a lot of concern about the fact that we have primaries and debates, and I think it's an open process. I like the fact that in my party we have a lot of candidates running, and there's a lot of visibility to alternative views. I think the Democratic Party has been mistaken by not having more debates and giving more visibility to insurgent candidates. But I think one of the reasons you're seeing as much anger as you're seeing in the voting public is a sense that nothing's happening in Washington, and that goes back in part to some of the rules in the Senate. We have the filibuster rule, the cloture rule, which basically says unless you have 60 votes, you can't get anything through the Senate anymore. And I think it makes sense for the Senate leadership to consider a modified filibuster rule, which is if the White House and the Senate are in different hands, Democrat, Republican, then perhaps you don't have the filibuster rule. You allow things to go to the White House with a simple majority. That's only if they're in separate hands, and there'd probably be other circumstances, certain types of legislation that would be the case for, and not for others. But I think there's a sense that, gosh, nothing's happening, and in part that relates to the fact that bills don't get to the president's desk. And I'd like to see more bills get to the president's desk and let him veto them if he feels they're not appropriate. But then both parties are, if you will, able to be seen by the public as taking action.
I'd like to return to the question in a minute about what this president or the next president should do. Still stuck a little bit on the line of inquiry about who the next president is going to be. And you said you do have a lot of candidates in your party already, and it's been a really cacophonous race. You've been careful to say you won't endorse yet. But will you support Donald Trump if he's the nominee in the end?
I will support the Republican nominee. I don't think that's going to be Donald Trump.
Why not?
My party has historically nominated someone who's a mainstream conservative, and someone who has a foundation in foreign policy that gives people confidence that they can guide the ship of state in troubled waters. Mr. Trump over the weekend, I think on 60 Minutes, said that he thought it'd be a good idea to let ISIS take over Syria, and then we could pick up the pieces. And I thought that was both absurd and dangerous. And I just don't think that kind of proposal is likely to lead him to become our nominee.
You say that the process results in the nomination of a mainstream conservative, but are you concerned? I mean, the sort of conventional assessment is that the process actually may produce a mainstream conservative, but that person does not look like a mainstream conservative anymore by the time they've succeeded in the primaries because they've been pulled so far to the right. Do you agree that that's the dynamic that any candidate in this race is facing now?
You know, that's been ascribed to the candidates in both parties, both political processes. I look at some of the mainstream conservatives running, Chris Christie, John Kasich, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Lindsey Graham, Carly Fiorina may well fit in that category as she elucidates more on her policy positions. And you know, I think each of them has staked out territory which is not extreme. And so I don't think I'd conclude that it's impossible for a Republican to be able to win the general election. As a matter of fact, I think we will win the general election, in part because we have such strong and capable people as the ones I've mentioned.
Is there any chance you may still get in?
No, I made the
That's
decision.
No. All right, let me shift this to foreign policy, if I may. And we've been talking a lot about Syria and ISIS this morning. Colin Powell said that one of the lessons of the American experience, really, of our multiple wars of the last 15 years is that we often will go into Libya, to Iraq, and act without any understanding of what's going to come next. And he said that in Syria, we need to focus on ISIS, and the notion of removing Assad is really secondary to that. It shouldn't be the focus of our policy now. And I wonder what you think. What is the way forward there?
Let me step back, and I will answer. I'll get to the answer to your question, but I'm going to step back because what I've found with the president is that he has consistently painted himself into a corner and then said, okay, now what would you do? And when you've painted yourself in that kind of corner, many times the options are pretty limited. So Ambassador Ford, for instance, who was ambassador to Syria for a number of years under this president, said we have no good options now. And they're not the kind of options now that there were 3.5 years ago. And even Secretary Clinton, 3.5 years ago, said we should coalesce leadership among the insurgent rebel forces in Syria. We should arm them, we should train them, we should support them, and help them defeat Assad. We did not do that. And we also should have had in place the status of forces agreement in Iraq. We did not do that. And as a result of those two bad decisions, we now have ISIS. And though the president said Assad must go, the combination of these events has made it very difficult for him to accomplish his mutual objectives of getting rid of Assad and also eliminating ISIS. So we're in a difficult position right now. So what action do we take? And by the way, I think the president's been a foreign policy disaster. I mean, you may love the president for a lot of reasons. His rhetoric is soaring, but the results have been terribly disappointing. And on foreign policy, disastrous. I mean, and he laid out what his foreign policy was in Cairo. And basically it was a policy of America pulling back from world leadership. And that happened by the reset relations with Russia. We're going to give you more flexibility after the election, criticizing Israel, walking back from the red line in Syria, saying we're going to pivot to Asia and then not doing so. Just one thing after the other. The president has spoken and then not followed through. And so the right answer for Syria and the rest of the world is first for America to stand by its word. When we say we're going to do something, we do it. Secondly, to rebuild our military. To say we're not going to shrink our military to a position where it's devastated. We're instead going to rebuild our strength. And third, we're going to exert leadership. Not just military leadership, but economic leadership. We are going to be a leader on the world stage again. I mean, whether you agree or disagree with the policies of President George W. Bush, and some of those mistakes he made are well known now. He at least believed that America should be a leader and took action as a leader. This president has not. If we're going to be successful in Syria, we have to be a leader there and around the world. Now, in terms of Syria, at this stage, I believe you do have to concentrate on eliminating ISIS. And that means using our resources to help do so. You don't let the Russians tell us that we can't fly over Syria. We're going to eliminate ISIS, and that's our first priority. At the same time, we're going to isolate Assad.
Does that mean more boots on the ground in Syria?
You know, I think we all hope it doesn't mean boots on the ground, but I don't think you eliminate that as an option. I don't think you go out and announce to the world, we're going to get rid of ISIS, but we're not going to do certain things. We'll do whatever it takes. And if we can't get the support from Turkey and from the nation, Saudi Arabia and others, to actually put boots on the ground sufficient to get rid of ISIS, then we will put boots on the ground or additional support there. But we have to eliminate ISIS, and we have to isolate Assad as we're doing so, and ultimately we want to see Assad go too. President said that correctly. We need to get rid of Assad, and we do. Russia complicates things right now, and Russia has outgamed us once again. They're diverting attention from their heinous actions in Ukraine, but we cannot allow ourselves to be diverted from the task at hand, which is to defeat ISIS and ultimately to replace Assad.
Let me ask you about the agreement with Iran. A number of the Republican candidates have said the right thing for the next president to do is simply to tear up that agreement on the first day in office. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's a lousy agreement. I wouldn't want to see it put in place, and we'll see how over the coming year and a half or so how Iran responds. But Iran being given a green light to develop a nuclear weapon in 10 years is not something which, I mean, I'm planning on being alive in 10 years. My kids are, my grandkids are, and a nuclear Iran is unacceptable to the world, unacceptable to us. And so this agreement, I think, is inappropriate in that it allows Iran to maintain its nuclear capacity, to keep the technology at Fordow in place, and to have an inspection regime that, frankly, is insufficient. So we'll see how the inspections go, what kind of visibility we have, and presuming, as I do, that we will be frustrated by the inspection process, I'd walk away from the agreement and instead put in place a much tougher sanction regime.
But why do you think our options would be any more constrained, including the option to use military force? Why would they be more restrained 10 or 15 years from now than they would be when the agreement's run its course than they would be today?
The agreement, one, gives enormous funding to Iran to be able to support terrorist activities throughout the Middle East, which it will be able to use over the ensuing 10 years. Secondly, it allows them to pursue nuclear technology at Fordow and elsewhere, so it does advance their nuclear capabilities, and it's something which I would not want to have continue.
A moment ago, you provided an assessment of this presidency in foreign affairs. We're in the 7th year. It's in the quadrennial schedule of Washington. We're kind of entering legacy evaluation period. And I wonder what you think the legacy of this presidency will be in domestic policy.
Disappointing also. I mean, you go back to Denver and the convention speech and the elevated nature. We're going to unite the nation. We're going to come together. He's been extraordinarily divisive. There's not been the progress in race relations that I think a lot of us had hoped for, expected. Poverty is at an all-time high in this country. Generational poverty, which could have been dealt with, has not been. Our education system continues to fail huge numbers of people in the inner cities, but also generally. We're not competitive globally in education. Our ability to compete, America's competitive capacity has not been enhanced. In fact, it's relative to other nations deteriorated. Our military has been devastated in many respects. The debt is doubled. So you say, well, what are the bright spots? Because that's pretty bad. That's a pretty
I would actually like to hear specifically. What are the good things
the
you
bright
can
spot,
say?
The recession is over, but then again, all recessions end. We didn't expect it to go on forever. And it took longer to get out of than we'd hoped for. The Federal Reserve has continued to keep their pedal to the metal for a long, long time. We don't know what the consequence of that will be long term, but the recession ended. I don't know that you give presidents a lot of credit for that, but he could have made things worse, I presume, than they were. Another bright spot, the energy sector. America is now virtually or on the road to energy independence. I don't think the president had anything to do with that positively. But positive piece, which is positive or negative, mixed, would be health care. The rate of health care inflation has slowed down. Mm-hmm. That's good news. More to go. I think Obamacare, there are pros and cons. The pro is that people who have pre-existing conditions can get insurance. More people are insured. The cons are a lot of the people that are insured just went onto Medicaid, which is expensive. It's going to be an expensive program. People were promised they could keep their insurance if they liked it. That promise was broken. And premiums have gone to the roof for a lot of people. So a lot of negative with that. But domestically, not much of a record. And internationally, I think just a devastating series of foreign policy. I mean, look around the world. Ukraine, China in the South China Sea, North Korea emboldened, Iran now having capacity to have more money to support terrorism on a 10-year path for a nuclear weapon. Jerusalem and Israel, what happened there? No progress there. Attacking Israel, well, I don't mean attacking Israel, attacking our friends in Israel has not led to the kind of breakthrough that President hoped for. Look what's happening in Syria. I mean, around the world, Northern Africa, Libya, it's been just a devastating series of events.
I want to isolate your answer on Obamacare quickly. Just, are you saying we are in the end better off with it than we would have been without it?
Well, there are pros and cons. I'd rather see it eliminated and replaced with something which does a better job making sure that pre-existing conditions can be covered, that everybody gets insurance, but that the price of insurance doesn't go through the roof. I'd like to see far more emphasis on personal savings accounts, health savings accounts, and I'd like to see the mandated coverages, meaning the specific treatments that are mandated in these comprehensive plans. I'd like to see a lot of those taken out so people can get a catastrophic policy.
Is there anything you can point to in this presidency that you see as an unalloyed good thing for America?
Give me some time, but the answer is yes. And I mean, the president has tried on some fronts. I'm a bit of a loss here, well, I mentioned the recovery. We have gotten out of a recession.
Yeah, but you said he had nothing to do with it.
Well, no, I didn't say it. I said he could have made it worse. He could have made it worse. He didn't make it worse. But we got out of the. But help me on poverty, education, the deficit, race relations. These major issues. There hasn't been progress. Healthcare. I did mention that the health inflation rate has slowed down. That's positive.
Last question for you. I wonder, there's been so much analysis of what happened in 2012, and presumably you've given it some thought too. And I wonder,
no, not at all. No.
I wonder why do you think you lost in the end?
Well, I'm reminded of that wonderful quote, and it was Walter Mondale, who had the misfortune of running against an incumbent, Ronald Reagan. And when it was all over, he said, all my life I wanted to run for president in the worst way, and that's just what I did. And so, I go back, and I wish I could do it again. I mean, you learn from your experience. Yeah, yeah, we made that decision, but you learn from your experience. There's some things I'd do differently, but clearly one of the things we have to do differently as a party, and I think the rhetoric on the part of some in this campaign has been unfortunate on this front. What we have to do as a party is do a better job connecting with minority voters to convince them that the reason we're conservative and believe in the principles we do is we believe those principles will help middle income and minority families and poor families get out of poverty, get better wages, and have a better future. Let me make that really clear. The reason I'm a Republican, the reason I'm conservative, is I'm absolutely convinced, without any question in my mind, that policies of my party are most designed and most effective in helping people get out of poverty and helping middle-income families have a better future, higher wages, and more take-home pay and a brighter future. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And I'm happy to sit down and argue that out with anybody who'd like to do it. I mean, I'm going to go to a college this afternoon and make that pitch. The Democratic policies sound good and are associated with a big heart, but they haven't helped. And one of the challenges I had as a candidate was that I would talk about growth and GDP and small business without making the connection which I understood and which many people in my party immediately think of, but which people at large may not think of, which is the reason I'm interested in small business and business formation and GDP growth and all those things, is because those things, if they're working properly, create more jobs. When there's competition for more employees, wages go up. And middle-income families and poor families do better. It's the only way I know to help middle-income families have real incomes rise. You can make inflated incomes rise, just raise everybody's wages, but they don't have a real income increase unless there are more jobs and real competition bidding up the real price of labor. And so that is something I didn't communicate well enough. It's something our nominee has to do, and we have to do it particularly with the minority community. and say to Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans and African Americans and so forth, our policies are designed to give your kids a better education, to get families out of permanent poverty, generational poverty, to create more jobs so that there are better wages and better conditions for people who are working. That's why we believe what we believe. And I think we can do that. I think we can get minority populations to support our party. I didn't do it as well as I should have. Darn it, I wish I could do that properly. And I'm going to try and help others in this race do so. I believe our nominee will have that capacity, will be able to make that case. I think it's been unfortunate that some of the rhetoric has so clouded the picture that some people think we're anti-immigrant. Nothing could be further from the truth. My party is... Hey guys, my party is pro-legal immigration, massively. Do you realize of the top 25 companies in America, high-tech companies in America, top 25, 60% of them were founded or co-founded by a first-generation or second-generation immigrant. One of the things we have a system that attracts the best and the brightest of entrepreneurs around the world. We need that. We want that. It's part of creating the enterprises that create more good jobs that can lift our people and bring better wages. Now, we want immigration to work so that we bring in the best and the brightest. We don't want illegal immigration to swamp our legal immigration system. But the rhetoric has been terribly unfortunate in many respects. And look, I want to stop illegal immigration. At the same time, I want legal immigration to be an ongoing source of vitality and entrepreneurship and innovation and culture for our country. It's a big plus.
All right. Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you.
Appreciate your joining us today.